I'm trying to generalize
That
here.
are not.
Clearly, you can be an ethical atheist and a crappy religious person. However, I would put my money always, I would bet always on the person who tries to challenge his nature and tries to adhere to some moral code than someone who tries to just reinvent the wheel ethically daily. Wouldn't you? I mean, isn't that common sense? This is why I think being on the left and being atheistical just makes you dumber. It doesn't end up with you being more logical.
I think I disagree with that for the original statement. There is no evidence and proof of other than opinion, because there's no any data to track it, or by basis of your personal experiences. Because I've personally experienced people who are super religious that are just, excuse my French, that are just generally shitty people.
This is why I said in the vast majority of cases. Okay.
But in my case, though, from my expectations, in the mass majority of cases, it's always the people who were raised in non-religious households who are more ethical and better people than the people who were raised in religious households.
I think in life, either things confirm the obvious or are typically wrong. It sounds like you have a chip on your shoulder to assume that someone who strives to war against, let's say, if they're a man, their sexual predatory nature, and if they're a woman, their emotions, that they're going to end up being less ethical than someone who just doesn't care, right, and does what they want. I mean, how can you ever raise children with such a standard, right? Of course, if someone strives to be more ethical, in this case, by tempering their nature against an ethical religious code, they're going to be more ethical than. Why
Not
can you
necessarily true. I've met tons of people who have called for.
Tons. I'm saying in the vast majority of cases.
Ted Bundy was a
Christian. About personal experience. Why do you keep on saying I know people? I know people. I'm saying in the vast majority of cases, people who strive. It doesn't even have to be the Bible.
Because one, you don't have a statistic to prove that, and secondly, from my perspective, in mass majority of cases, it's always the people who are not religious schools who are better, more ethical people than the people who are. That's how I see. That's how and I concede that is a personal. No,
it sounds silly.
I concede that.
You know why? It's because I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure, like, if I took the Bible outside of this discussion, meaning there's someone who only studies Marcus Aurelius or Plato's Republic or other attempts to make themselves better people on this planet, then what you would acknowledge for sure that person would shine above all the rest who don't. But only
you can't say that you cannot say that because there is no data to prove that. There is someone who could just as well do it.
It's equivalent to saying that someone who works out is going to end up being less healthy than someone who doesn't. In the vast majority of cases, it makes no sense. You're actually pushing people towards my side by failing to acknowledge.
That's a discontent. That's a disconnected.
I'm not even mentioning God, by the way. I never mentioned the belief in God. I mentioned being sensitized by an ethical, moral code, whether God exists or not. But you're saying not even that makes you a better person. Everything is morally relative.
You said that was raised you were in the hypothetical you gave me, and correct me if I'm wrong. In the hypothetical you gave me, the ethical moral code was used. It was religious text.
No, correct. That doesn't mean they have to believe the Bible.
Someone who was raised in a non-religious household with not ethics.
Correct. Individual moral training.
So by that logic of what you said, you were saying that inherently the Bible is people who are religious are more ethical and more moral than people who are not religious.
In the vast majority of cases, yes.
Okay, so because there's one, no data to prove that. Two, tons of
data, by the way, in terms of red and blue cities. Red and blue cities show
tons of personal anecdotal evidence based off of both you and me and other people.
I think people acknowledge that the more blue the city, you're in Seattle, Washington, right?
Yeah.
Very similar to Portland, Oregon. What's the crime rate versus a red city? It's through the roof. Why? Because your leaders, your politicians are typically irreligious and they allow people to steal and they condone things that increase an uneasy environment versus red cities. I mean, compare Chapel Hill, North Carolina to Brooklyn, New York. You still believe that more religious societies in America are more violent than less religious ones?